All right, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you have made it through lecture 6. Sorry for the mess up on how I uploaded it to YouTube. My fault. It should be working fine now. And again, just to let you know, the quiz on Friday does not include lecture 7 over cell reproduction. So make sure you're confident in lecture 6, taking good notes before you move on to this one. Okay? Again, this is a very foundational topic in biology, and it probably has been taught to you at some point. It's just been a really long time. I think I found a balance on this one of kind of going over the highlights without getting too lost in the details. So let's get started. So again, there's some overlap here about what we've already learned in previous lectures. So the idea of cell reproduction is kind of twofold. One is, if you're a multicellular organism, you got to have lots of cells, right? But yet you started as one cell. So the process of starting as that one cell and becoming a human that has trillions of cells, it happens because of cellular reproduction. And we also have to replace any damaged or worn out cells as we grow, and so that there's a constant reproduction of our cells, so we can replace the ones that need to be replaced, regardless of also growing. Okay, so as children grow, I love these cheesy pictures, I keep them in. As children grow, it's not that their cells are getting larger, they just are getting more cells. As we repair our skin and other tissues, we need more cells. And then, of course, we also want to look at the other side of things, that in unicellular organisms, this is reproduction of a new organism altogether. So we'll talk about that a little bit in this lecture. And then, of course, as you go from one fertilized egg to many cells, it is all by the same process. So if you're a unicellular organism, when your cell goes through reproduction, you have an offspring, essentially. And this doesn't require two parents. There's no egg or sperm involved. There's no mixing of genetic information necessary to carry out asexual reproduction. Essentially, one cell splits, and now there's two. Bacteria, unicellular fungus, there's many unicellular protists, and this is how they multiply, right? And that is the existence. The extent of their existence is as one cell. Something that hopefully looks familiar is that all cells come from other cells. Okay, whether it's a parent cell or just as we are repairing our skin after a cut or a burn, those new cells come from pre-existing cells. So cellular reproduction is necessary for not only making new cells, but also brand new organisms. And oh, I don't know what happened to my little fun thing. It disappeared really quickly. But that's part of the cell theory that we talked about a couple lectures ago, that all living things are made of cells, and cells come from other cells. So when we break down this process of cellular reproduction, there's kind of two parts of the life of a cell, and we call that the cell cycle. The first part is the cell grows. It gets a little bigger, okay? And as those cells get a little bigger, we're going to duplicate everything inside. The DNA needs to be duplicated. We need to get more organelles, because essentially it's going to get split in half. So we need twice as much stuff. Then, once there's a certain amount of growth and preparation to divide, then we're going to go through the actual process of division. And that's where the parent cell, it divides into two daughter cells. I'm not sure why we don't call them son cells. We don't. We call them daughter cells. And along the way, those processes are heavily regulated by our friends the enzymes, which we talked about in the last lecture, that we're going to oversimplify this and kind of zoom out and just see the main steps, but chemically, this is all happening. There's no direction by anything else but chemical reactions. We're not going to get tied up into that during this lecture, but in the background, I need you to know that this is all just happening because of the natural processes that we already talked about of enzymes lowering the activation energy so certain chemical reactions and metabolism can occur, and cell division is one of those processes. So again, here's some familiar words. When we mentioned it the first time, I said, hey, we're going to see these again. And I'm not going to test you on them the first time, but you better believe them. They're going to make their appearance on this next exam. So you've seen them once. Now let's really dive in. So when we talk about DNA, earlier we talked about DNA as a nucleic acid made up of nucleotides, but we also talked about that it's found inside the nucleus of eukaryotic cells, right? And in order to pack in that much DNA, we can see it in two different forms, and they both start with the prefix chrome, which means color. So this slide starts with the word chromosome, which is probably more familiar to you. Chromosomes are when the DNA has already been replicated, which is another word for copied, and it has to be copied so that each daughter cell gets a full set of DNA. All of the genes, all of the chromosomes, all of the nucleotides get copied. And then we're going to package them into these nice condensed complexes called chromosomes. And they're going to be really tightly wound. We said already that if you unwound our 46 chromosomes as humans, we would have over 6 feet of genetic material in every nucleus of every cell, which is really crazy to think about. But the way it's packaged makes them distinct units of genetic material so that when we need to split them up between the two daughter cells, it's easy to differentiate them. Other times of the cell cycle, when the cell is growing and just doing its normal cell thing of making proteins, DNA is the instructions for making those proteins, we call that form chromatin. So in most of the cell cycle, the DNA is relaxed. It looks like thin threads or a bowl of spaghetti sometimes in pictures, and that's when the genes are expressed to do all sorts of things that the cell needs. When the cell gets the signal to start dividing, or that there's a need to divide, we're going to start condensing down that genetic material into chromosome form so that we can move forward. Oh, I'm really upset that my little star bursts aren't showing up. But again, that should be review for you. We also already had a picture similar to this in a previous lecture. So before cell division can occur, we're going to take, here's our double helix that should look familiar. Those are individual nucleotides. They are wound around these proteins, and then those bundles of DNA and protein are bundled up some more, and they're looped and twisted until they become these distinct units that are very compact, very dense, full of proteins and DNA. There's a few C words, okay? So we talked about chromosomes, we talked about chromatin with an N. I got another chroma word for you. So again, make you some flashcards, figure out, they're very similar, they're all DNA, but they are used in different forms. So before cell division, we're going to copy the DNA so that each daughter cell gets its own set, but we're going to keep the two copies together until the end of cell division, so that the cell can check that, yep, all the DNA has been copied, we have them all here, and now we can move forward with division. So we have another word. This X we see as a chromosome. So when you hear the word chromosome, I want you to think about an X. But really what that means is each side of that X is an individual piece of DNA. Each part, this is like a dark orange and then a lighter orange. The dark orange will go to one daughter cell and the light orange will go to the other daughter cell. What I don't like about this picture is I need you to know they're exactly the same. Sometimes we use different colors to show that they're different forms of the gene, or different forms of genetic material. Sure, it might have the information for eye color, but some people have eye color information to give them blue eyes versus brown eyes versus green eyes. So I'm not super happy with this picture from the textbook, because really those two individual pieces of chromosomes are exactly the same, like you put them on a copy machine. Each individual bit is called a chromatid. with a D at the end. And we call them sisters. I guess everything in here is very feminine. Sorry, gentlemen. I don't want to offend you. I didn't make up the naming convention here. And so each sister chromatid is identical to the other, and they are attached together with a little belt called a centromere. So lots of C words, I know. So be prepared for that. So I already mentioned about the cell cycle, that really a cell is not born. It doesn't, well, it can die. We'll get there. But since cells come from other cells, it's just this continuing cycle. Okay? And there's three main parts, or actually you can divide it up a bunch of different ways. So there's interphase, mitosis, and cytokinesis. And these are the stages that take place from the beginning of one division to the end of the next. So it kind of just continues on. But this is where one cell becomes two. Okay, and then of course we can think about those two cells becoming two again and having four and so on and so forth. One major way we can divide up the cell cycle, and I've got some images that you'll see, is interphase and then the M phase. And M stands for mitosis or mitotic phase. Okay, I'm going to get going. I got a few more minutes before I get timed out. But here's a picture that we're going to see a few different times in a few different ways. So these orange arrows all the way over here, that's interphase. And then this blue bit over here is the M phase, or the mitotic phase. And that's when mitosis and cytokinesis occurs. And we're going to talk about what each one of these words mean. But I'm going to see how far I can go here. Interphase, as we just saw from that diagram, takes up the majority of the cell's life. The cell cycle is most of the time in interphase. If you took a survey of 100 cells on your skin, most of them will be in interphase. And this is when the cell's just doing its normal stuff, its usual functions as a cell. So depending on what type of cell it is, that actually can vary. Some of our cells divide every month or so. Others we have for our entire lives. So it's very diverse, and that's just in humans, let alone other types of creatures in the world. So, and we saw this in the picture with the circle graph. Interphase can be separated into three individual phases. I think I'm going to pause here because I think this is a good stopping point, and I'll pick up here in the next segment.